Hey there everyone, welcome to Tales and Texts and I'm your host Nisha. I hope you're doing great and welcome to another book haul. So in today's episode, I'm doing part 2 of my series of the 12 best books from ancient India that you absolutely must read. Now, if you have followed my channel for some time now, you will be aware that there is another video that I put up where I've listed 12 incredible books written by ancient Indian authors. And those books span, many centuries prior to us. And I had even given you a bonus material which was pretty exciting, and I think I filmed this video sometime in December 2022, and so, or early 2023, Jan 2023, and I'd listed these 12 books by ancient Indian authors and one book by a contemporary writer. So in today's video, I wanted to do a part 2 of that first video and give you 12 more incredible books by ancient Indian authors. These 12 incredible, plays, anthologies of stories, anthologies of poetry, which I think absolutely anyone who is interested in reading Indian literature, especially ancient Indian literature, must have, in their library. So without any further ado, let's get right into this gorgeous stack of books, that's behind me. I have made some notes over here to talk about the author and the books themselves, because a lot of these books don't have the synopsis on the back cover. So I just kind of want to give you a brief about what these books entail and what the storylines are like, because I haven't read any of these books yet. I'm just reading, or rather have started reading one in this list, and I'll mention which one soon, but the rest I have not read yet, and so I wanted to give you as much information as I could. Alright, so now that we've got the introductions out of the way, let's dive right in. The very first book that we have on our list is Kadambari by Bana, also known as Banabhatta. So I'm going to be reading out the information that I've kind of made my notes in. So I'll be talking about the author and the storyline of the book, like I said, the premise of the book, and wherever I could get information about any specific literary styles or tropes or any literary sentiments that these authors are known for. If I could have found information, I've mentioned that over there. So let's talk about Kadambari by Bana. Bana or Banabhatta is believed to have lived sometime in the late 6th to early 7th century CE. CE is AD. And Kadambari is actually a play where the Gandharva princess Kadambari and a human prince by the name of Chandrapida, they fall in love with each other, and it's the stories about their quest to be united and the challenges that they face, the tragedy that they face, where they basically experience separation and loss, and then how they finally come back together, and the story ends with both of them getting married and living happily ever after. This is the book that I've actually started reading, and I've finished around 100 and something pages of this. So what I did read in the introduction was that Bana passed away. He died when he was sort of midway through the book, and his son had to take over the writing and kind of finish the story based on whatever his father had informed him of the storyline, of the premise. One of the things that the introduction mentions is how Bana's son has done a phenomenal job in keeping together both the tone that Bana used and also sticking to the original intention, plan and ideas that his father had for this work. So despite getting the chance to sort of let his creativity shine, to let his vision take root, Bana's son decided to honor his father by retaining the essence of the literary form, the essence of the words, the essence of the story, the language used, the kind of vocabulary used, very similarly mimicking his father as best as he could. And so the introduction does mention that he's done a phenomenal job, and then that the second part of the play seems very close to the first part, and therefore you wouldn't really find out that there were two different authors unless you were aware of this particular nugget of information. So Kadambari by Bana is something that I started reading. It is rich with metaphors, analogies, and similes. Absolutely brilliant book, and I think you're going to enjoy this. The next book in our list is The Three Satires from Ancient Kashmir by Kshemendra. So if you have followed my channel, you would also have seen another book review that I did of a book by Kshemendra. It was called Samaya Matrika, or The Courtesan's Keeper. I really enjoyed that book. I will put a link down to the book review down below. And that was a book that I really enjoyed. I really liked Kshemendra's style of satire, and therefore I wanted to get another work of his. And that's where the three satires from ancient Kashmir, that was what inspired me to get this book. A bit about Kshemendra: he is or he was a novelist, playwright, and poet from the 11th century CE. And his mainstay in writing, his main themes that he focused on were usually satire. And there are very few satire writers from ancient India, ancient Indian literature, and Kshemendra was one of the top names for this particular genre. Now, the three satires from ancient Kashmir actually contain satirical accounts of the people from Kashmir and the life in Kashmir during the 11th century. And it is very important to note that at this point in time, there was a lot of religious diversity, although it was a highly Hindu population. So I mention this because, people seem to have a strong misconception that Kashmir did not really, have a presence in the, Indian literary sphere, especially in ancient times. But if you look at a lot of the people on this list, a lot of the playwrights there, many of them were from Kashmir and from the Kashmir region, that is, which includes both Pakistan and India of today. And so Kashmir has played a very phenomenal role in terms of developing the Indian literary landscape. And so there was a lot of religious diversity, racial diversity, and so the three satires is also a commentary on the sociological status of the 11th century. So I'm looking forward to reading this. The next book in our list is Srivara's Kathakautakam. Srivara was a 15th century writer, 15th century CE, and Kathakautakam, also called as the Tale of Wonder, is actually a really special book because it is a book which shows us, which is the testament to how Islam and Hinduism have always been intertwined, and how the Islamic community and Hindu community have been influencing each other through art and literature for millennia. The story of Kathakautakam is actually based or inspired from a Persian poem called Yusuf wa Zulekha, which is basically a tragic romance poem that talks of the love between Yusuf and Zulekha, and how the two of them are separated and how they come back together. And so Srivara, who was a devout Shaivite, who was a devout worshipper of Shiva, staunch Hindu, he loved the tenets of love, empathy, and kindness that was espoused in Yusuf wa Zulekha, specifically from the perspective of the lessons that the Prophet Muhammad provided about being kind and empathetic and generous to fellow human beings. And so Srivara was really impressed by these sentiments, and he discovered this poem, and he decided, I think India needs something like this. Our people I think they would enjoy hearing a story like this, and therefore that was how Kathakautakam was created. Now the poem does take certain creative liberties compared to the original Yusuf wa Zulekha, but on the whole I think this book is really interesting. And for me particularly, given the current political climate where there's a lot of religious fanaticism and just a disenfranchisement of people who don't subscribe to a particular religious belief system or a particular political system. So there's so many issues that are plaguing India today, and I think this book really is a testament to how all of us can come together, because we were a single community, we were in a way a local family, global local family. And so I think that's why one of the reasons why I picked up this book, which sounds super interesting. Once I read it, I'll definitely post a review. The next book in our list is Lilavai by Kouhala. So a couple of things about this book. First off, about the writer. Some of you may have heard of the name Kouhala, but here's the thing. Kouhala is a name that has been assumed or given to the author of Lilavai because of the absence of the author's real name. So what I mean is this particular story, Lilavai, the story is extremely hard to date. It is believed, so some of the earliest references to Lilavai as a story, as a poem prose story, could be found in works dating to the 9th century. Yet this story of Lilavais could be significantly older. Now what's happened is that the name of the author is unknown because the original text which contained the story does not have the name of the author. But an ancient commentator on this play, so people would write commentaries about the play just like how we do today. We write introduction, we write commentaries, we write synopsises and so on. So even in the ancient times, people used to write commentaries about the plays, poems and other literary content that was produced. So one of the ancient commentators, or they used the name Kouhalena in reference to the author. Now it isn't sure whether this particular word Kouhalena is indicative of the author's real name, or if it was just a pseudonym, or perhaps sort of an epithet. I hope I'm pronouncing that word correctly. The kind of like a title given to this particular author, so nobody really knows. But that's why after much deliberation, scholars have decided to dub the author as Kouhala, and therefore Lilavai, the story, has been attributed to Kouhala. So what is this book about? So unlike the previous works that we've looked at, which is Kadambari and Kshemendra's 3 Satires and Kathakautakam, which were written in Sanskrit, Lilavai was written in Prakrit. So now just for context, Sanskrit was a upper caste language, a priestly language, a kingly language, a language of the royal court, whereas the common population, the commoners, the non-royal public would use a variety of other languages, not Sanskrit, such as Prakrit, Pali, and many other ancient Indian languages which have gone extinct today. So, and that's mainly because Sanskrit was not taught to people who did not belong to the priestly class or kingly class. It was not taught to people who were, whose profession was that of writers, poets, and who did not work for the king in the court. So it was a very inaccessible language, and very few people knew Sanskrit well enough to actually produce content in it. But other local languages like Prakrit and Pali, they flourished throughout India, throughout South Asia, and they sort of evolved into other local indigenous languages as well. And so this particular book, Lilavai by Kouhala, is written in Prakrit. Now, Lilavai is a romance which is located in what is present day Andhra Pradesh, and it traces the story of Princess Lilavai from Sinhala. So Sinhala is present day Sri Lanka. So Princess Lilavai belongs to Sinhala, the Sinhala kingdom, and then a prophecy is made about her saying that her husband, her future would-be husband, is going to rule the world. And she comes across the photograph of King Hala of Pratisthana, and she falls in love with him. And so she wants to meet him, and so she goes on a journey to meet him. And this story is about her quest to meet her would-be husband, and also about her cousins, her friends, their love stories, their love tragedies. It involves going into the underworld, facing monsters, King Hala facing monsters, and it's a very exciting play slash prose slash poetry which basically has elements of fantasy and reality in it. So yeah, pretty exciting. And this particular edition of the Murthy Classics has the writing written in the Devanagari script, as well. Murti classics typically usually have the original script of the language the text still exists, or a translation of the script in another language in its closest iteration, along with the English translation. So this would be a good option to pick up if you like having multilingual books in your library. The next book in our list is super special, because, okay, I'm just going to show you what that book is, because I really love this book and I'm so happy that it's in my list, and I think you should have it too, and that is Therighata. So Therighata is really special and a very unique book because it is the very first anthology of poetry by the very first Buddhist women. And according to the introduction, some sources and some scholars suggest that this book right here, this anthology, could be the very first anthology by women in the world. Now, for context, the word Theri refers to Buddhist women who are very high up in the spiritual ladder, you could say. They are women who have spent many years in religious and spiritual pursuits. They have a lot of wisdom. They've learned a lot. They are extremely familiar and deeply knowledgeable about the tenets of Buddhism, and they have done a lot of they've given back to the world in the form of volunteering and donations and supporting the general public for different causes. So Theri was a very specific word given to a Buddhist woman who was very high up in the spiritual scale within the religious sphere of Buddhism. And this particular book is actually an anthology of poetry compiled from the past 2 millennia. So 2 millennia and even older, that is beyond the first century CE is typically considered the starting point for when most of these poems have been collated, but some of them could have come from even earlier on, that is from BC periods as well, mainly because this anthology of poems was originally spoken. It was oral in tradition, told by woman to woman, saint to saint, Buddhist practitioner to Buddhist practitioner, and it focused on the life experiences, the troubles, challenges, victories of women. These poems were created by women. They were about women, and they were told and shared to women. And so they were both about spiritual topics, that is, as being a Buddhist, especially being a Buddhist as a woman in that particular era when she lived, and also about lost loves, about family, about friendships, female friendships. So the themes are extremely diverse. They give a very good insight into the intimate inner lives of these women. And they were originally, like I mentioned, they were very oral in nature, right? So they were not written down, and because they were oral in nature, the original poems would most likely have been written in, or rather spoken in, the indigenous languages of the women that the women used themselves. So these were originally sourced by the common public, whoever heard these poems in the original languages, and when they were shared to other people, they were shared with other people, they were shared in a mix of different languages based on whoever was doing the telling, right? So if I sing a poem in, let's say, in Prakrit, by the time it reaches the 10th person, it could have changed in language, in form, in tone, in maybe slightly theme variations by the time it reaches the 10th person, right? So similarly, ultimately this book was compiled in Pali. The written material was written in Pali, and the time period is from officially starts at 1st century CE, although many scholars believe it could be centuries or even millennia before the 1st century CE. and it comes sometime and it ends sometime during the Middle Ages. That is, the last few poems were sourced sometime in the Middle Ages or slightly after that. So a very, very large time period, you could say. And it contains a lot of poems. I have read a couple of them. They're just so beautiful. Some of them are, you know, they feel very, I don't like to use the word superficial because sometimes it has a very negative connotation, but they are very simple and straightforward. Others are so deep. But I think this book is definitely one for poetry lovers, or for Buddhists, you know, just anyone who enjoys having something this incredible, you know, the very first anthology by womankind in the world. So I think you should definitely pick this up. Alright, so the next set of books that I'm going to be talking about are, once again, we're going to come back to Sanskrit works. And the first book that I want to talk about is Malatimadhava by Bhavabhuti. So Bhavabhuti was believed to have lived sometime in the 8th century CE. And he specialized so he was known as a philosopher slash writer. So when I say this, I'm talking about the style of writing that this particular writer exhibited, because some writers, you know, they are more action oriented, others are more philosophical. So Bhavabhuti sort of lended more towards the philosophical side. His writing, you know, was very ornate and poetic, but it was also very, very hugely philosophical, exploring deep philosophical ideas and their import to the time. Malatimadhava specifically is a romance novel, but it falls under the romance horror genre, and it's the only one of its kind from ancient India. So this book is a combination of romance and horror, and as far as my research showed, this is the only book of this particular genre in ancient India, and it focuses on the love story between a minister's daughter by the name of Malati and another man named Madhava, and about how they want to get married, but then other people have other plans for them. So it's a very eerie novel. It has very gothic themes. I think, although the word gothic is wrong to be used, because the concept of gothic came centuries after this book was actually written. So, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of what you can expect. So there is a lot of, you know, there are a lot of horror elements. There are a lot of descriptions of tantric rituals, and I actually came across an article which said that there is a reference to cannibalism here. I cannot vouch for that since I have not read this book yet, but OMG, if that's there, like, that's gonna be a crazy ride, right? And on top of that, this is actually all kind of nestled, all of these eerie, creepy themes, horror themes are nestled within the romance genre. So definitely pick this up if you like going on crazy romantic rides like this. Bhavabhuti's Malatimadhava. The next book that we have in our list is Sri Harsha Deva's Ratnavali. So Harsha Deva, so he's one of the authors who is extremely confusing to date, because you know, so when it comes to ancient Indian authors, purely because a lot of their you know, accounts, plays, written content is the manuscripts are all missing, right? They're either missing or they're completely destroyed, you know, whether it's because of time or because of all the various invasions, colonizations, and so on. So a lot of these accounts are destroyed, so it's very hard to kind of date and sometimes even name these authors, and generally the problem that you face is that you don't know who this person is, and so you can't identify a single author. Now the problem with Harsha Deva is that you have more than one person who could have been the author for this, and that's mainly because you have one person who was a writer by the name of Harsha Deva, who is believed to have lived in the 10th century. Then there was another king by the name of Harsha Deva who was believed to have lived sometime in the 11th or 12th century. And then there was another ruler of Kashmir, or rather in Kashmir, between the 6th and 7th centuries, and he was called Harshavardhana. And many scholars believe that this Harshavardhana of Kashmir, who lived and ruled during 6th to 7th century. Sometimes, so it's not exactly clear, whether it's between the 6th and 7th century, or if it's the last part of 6th century or early part of 7th century. It's not really super clear. But sometime between 6th and 7th century, this Harshavardhana is believed to have been the author of this play Ratnavali. So Ratnavali basically focuses on the princess Ratnavali, who is a very beautiful princess, and the king Udayana and their love story. So King Udayana falls in love with Ratnavali, and Ratnavali falls in love with Udayana, and they want to get married. But there are a lot of thorns on their path. One being Udayana's first wife, Vasavadatta. And it's about how the lovers try to, outwit people who don't want them to get together, how they try to convince people who they love but who are opposed to their marriage, and ultimately how they get together. One of the very important facts about this book is that this play is the very first text or written manuscript where the festival of Holi is mentioned and described. So up until then, it was, like I mentioned, so a lot of these festivals and cultural celebrations were very, they used to take place, but there was no physical record of them. But it is in the play Ratnavali that you actually come across the festival of Holi for the very first time. So yeah, romance novel, festivals from ancient India. What more do you want, right? Speaking about Vasavadatta, the next book on our list is Subandhu's Vasavadatta. Now Subandhu, again, so this writer is hard to date because it's believed that he lived either during the 5th century CE or during the 7th century CE. So one of those two time periods. One thing about this book that's super special is that it is considered to be the oldest romantic novel in India. So, so what I mean is, so we have so far, in all the books that we've covered so far, we have seen a lot of romance stories in all of the plays that we've spoken about. But that's the thing, they are plays which are very short, which are very which have a specific number of acts, and essentially don't qualify into what would be considered as a full-fledged novel. But Vasavadatta by Subandhu is actually, in terms of the literary rules, or rather it does fall under what would be considered as a novel. Now, just right off the bat, I know that I mentioned, in the previous one, in Ratnavali, that Udayana had a wife named Vasavadatta. Now, this Vasavadatta is not that. So, it has no connection whatsoever, right? Subandhu was very inspired by a writer called Bhasa, whose book I do have over here. We will get to that soon enough. But for those of you who have heard of Bhasa, I'm sure you know that he's one of the most, preeminent playwrights from ancient India. He and Kalidasa are considered to be sort of the fathers of Indian literature. So, Bhasa wrote a play called Swapna Vasavadatta, and Swapna Vasavadatta is actually refers to the Vasavadatta who was King Udayana's wife. Now, other writers like Harsha, Deva and Subandhu, they took inspiration from Bhasa in terms of, either characters or names or incidents. So because Bhasa predated all of them, right? We will get to, like I said, we will get to his work soon enough, where I'll talk a bit more about Bhasa. But basically, Bhasa predated all of them. And so a lot of the playwrights and poets and novelists who came after Bhasa, they took a lot of inspiration from him. And so while Shri Harsha Deva actually took the inspiration of Udayana as a king from Bhasa's work, he kind of digressed from Udayana's story and created his own story of the love story between Ratnavali and Udayana. And what Subandhu did was he just took the name as an inspiration, Vasavadatta, but then he completely wrote a completely unique story. And one of the reasons this book is extremely special is, apart from being one of the first full-fledged Indian romantic novels, is that this is the only play on our entire list which does not seem to have any sort of literature that it took inspirations from, in terms of its theme or anything else. So what I mean is, this is a completely original piece of work, generated by Subandhu, created by Subandhu, and written down for posterity. So this story is basically of a prince called Kandarpaketu, who dreams of a beautiful woman, and he falls in love with this dream woman, and he's determined to search her out and to be united with her, because he believes that he's supposed to be her husband, and that she is his soulmate from many lifetimes past, and that it's his duty to find her and to marry her, because they're supposed to be together. Now after a lot of trials and tribulations, he does find her, and it happens to be a princess by the name of Vasavadatta. Now, but here's the problem. Vasavadatta is already betrothed to somebody else, and she's supposed to marry somebody else, but she falls in love with Kandarpaketu. Now Kandarpaketu and Vasavadatta elope, and it seems like things are going to be fine finally, but then what happens is, one day Kandarpaketu finds out that Vasavadatta is missing, and ultimately he finds out after many months that she has been cursed. Now, why has she been cursed? How is the curse broken? What happens? Do they finally get the world sanctioned to get married? To know that, you will have to read this book. I am super excited to read it, and I think you'll be too. The next book in our list is by Visakhadatta, and it's Mudrarakshasa. So unlike most of the other books on our list, Mudrarakshasa is the only political novel or play that we have right now. That is, we as in me and all of you watching this video. While the other plays, most plays actually, if you see from ancient India, you see most of them either are, they're either comedic or they are romance / erotic, most of them, right? But Mudrarakshasa by Visakhadatta is a purely political play. So first off, let's just look at who Visakhadatta was. So Visakhadatta is believed to have lived either sometime between the 4th and 5th century BCE or during the CE, or the 6th century CE, right? And based on and there is some information about his family that he himself has written, and which has been found, which lends people to believe that Visakhadatta actually came from a political family or even from a royal family. Not sure which royal dynasty, but he was either a political family or a royal family member, and therefore because of which he had a tremendous grasp and knowledge of politics, military strategies, and the law. So all of which come into play in Mudrarakshasa. Now Mudrarakshasa deals with the Maurya dynasty, specifically from the time of the reign of Chandragupta Maurya, and it is about it's essentially about how Chandragupta Maurya convinces a hostile minister by the name Dhanananda to come to his side and to support him in his political motivations and political campaigns. And it's also about how Chanakya uses his astute political strategies, military strategies, punishments, rewards, and just the entire, how he manipulates the law in order to help Chandragupta Maurya gain complete suzerainty over his kingdom. So this entire play, based on the research that I did about it, is not very poetic. It's not very again, it's not very fun in the conventional sense, and that's again mainly because it's only a certain subsect of people who enjoy political dramas and political intrigues with absolutely no other side stories, which have any comedic relief or romantic relief. So this book is, I would say this book, it would work really well for someone who's really interested in understanding about, Chandragupta Maurya's time period, about how Chanakya's mind would work, how these political and military strategies would be implemented, and what the politics and governance of that particular time, whether it was between the 4th or 5th century or in the 6th century, what politics in India actually looked like and how India was shaped as a result of these kings and these ministers. So it's a good account of those political experiences. So I think if you enjoy that, you'll definitely like Mudrarakshasa. The next book in our list is Bhatta Narayana's Venisamhara. So Venisamhara by Bhatta Narayana is actually based on the Mahabharata. Now Bhatta Narayana is believed to have lived sometime between the late 8th century or early 9th century CE. And Venisamhara is actually considered a heroic play. Now what this means is, so plays in ancient India would fall under certain themes. For example, it would be romance or tragedy or comedy or satire or heroics. So what this meant was, while there might have been stories across the board, with themes across the board, the core energy of that play would be that of the main sentiment. So if it was love, ultimately the goal and purpose of that play would be to bring that love to fruition. If that play was comedic or a satire, the ultimate goal of that particular piece would be to convey the humor, or would be to make a satirical statement about the subject. Right, so similarly, Venisamhara is a heroic play, and it's based on the Mahabharata, specifically of the war years of the Mahabharata. Right, so once the Pandavas finish their 13-year exile, the Kurukshetra war begins, and from the time of the Kurukshetra war beginning to the time Yudhishthira ascends the throne. So that's the period that this play covers, and it specifically focuses on amping up the heroics and this heroic sentiments of the characters involved. So one of the things that I found out while I was researching this play was that not a lot happens physically in terms of the action. So what this means is, a lot of the a major chunk of the play takes place in the form of conversations. It's about, I have actually made a couple of notes over here. It's powerful, it's very dramatic. There are a lot of long speeches, there are a lot of declarations which are either heroic or pathetic. So it's not very elegant, and even certain scholars who analyze the linguistic strengths and weaknesses of these playwrights, they have mentioned that Bhatta Narayana was not really known for being a very poetic, writer. He was more functional rather than aesthetic. That's a sentiment that is kind of shared between Bhatta Narayana and Visakhadatta of Mudrarakshasa. So so if this book I would say would be a good addition to anyone's library if you are interested in the Mahabharata. Specifically, if you're like me, I love reading any version of the Mahabharata, whether it's ancient or contemporary. I'll say give it to me. So if you're someone like that who likes to read different accounts of the Mahabharata, and again there are a lot of changes from the original, that epic that is from the critical edition. There are omissions of certain scenes. There are additions of new conversations that don't occur anywhere else. There are many different regional versions that are kind of mentioned over here, which you wouldn't find in the commonplace narrative of the Mahabharata. So this would be a new look, a different look, at the Mahabharata, specifically focusing on the conversations between the various characters, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, the elders, Krishna, and so on. So very specific sort of a book. but you might enjoy it. I do want to mention about books like these which have the same publisher. So the Venisamhara, Mudrarakshasa, Ratnavali. Yep, I think those three are the ones that have the same publisher, which is MLBD. Right, so one thing that you should know that is that this book has both the Sanskrit text and the English text. So you have the Sanskrit text with introduction, notes, and everything written completely in the original Sanskrit, and you also have the English translation in the second half of the book. So if you are someone who is studying Sanskrit, or perhaps you just like having the Sanskrit text with you, I think you will enjoy the MLBD publication. So definitely check this one out, because I think there are a few other, very few, but a few other publishers out there who have just the English version. So if you just keep in mind that this particular publisher, MLBD, is offering books that are in both Sanskrit and English. The next book in our list is by Dandin, and it is Dasa Kumara Charita, or the Tale of the 10 Princes. So Dandin's Dasa Kumara Charitam was written basically sometime in the 7th century or 8th century, because Dandin is believed to have lived sometime in between the 7th and 8th centuries. And Dandin, apart from being a novelist, playwright, and a poet, is also considered to be a literary theorist. So he would also write a lot of commentaries about plays written by other playwrights as well. So now Dasa Kumara Charitam actually follows the life, experiences and expeditions of Prince Rajavahana and his 9 companions. So that's why the tale of the 10 princes. Although Rajavahana is the protagonist and his exploits are given most of the book space, the other 9 princes are also, their stories are covered, their romances, their military exploits, their childhoods, so just their entire lives are charted. One of the main strengths of this book is that it describes ancient India geographically, culturally, socially, and economically in a very detailed way. Because these 9 princes travel the length and breadth of the country, you can actually see what ancient India looked like during the 7th and 8th centuries, what India consisted of, geographically speaking. There's a detailed account of the customs and festivals and celebrations of people, of the lifestyles of people from different regions. And just generally it's considered to be a brilliant sociological account of the time. So if you are interested in just looking at what the lifestyle of people could have been during the 7th to 8th centuries, I think this book would be a great one to read. Alright, the final book in our list of the 12 must-read in ancient Indian literary works is the 13th Plays of Bhasa. Alright, so I've kept the best for last, or the oldest for last. So let's just take a look at Bhasa and his profile a little bit. So Bhasa is believed to have lived during the late Mauryan period, which is sometime between 321 BC to 184 BC. So of the entire list of books that we covered, of the entire list of playwrights and poets that we covered today, with the exception of Therighata, Bhasa is the oldest who comes from the BC period, right? And although he is believed to have lived between 321 to 184 BC, his plays by themselves, the written works by themselves are dated sometime in the 1st century. So it is believed that he is more likely to have lived closer to the 1st century than away from it, right? And most plays of Bhasa have been lost to posterity, and only these 13 plays have been found. Some of them are available in full, some of them are available only partially, but of all his work, and he had a very large repertoire of his works, but most of them have gone extinct, destroyed, missing, unfortunately, and these 13 are the only that remain. And it is believed by scholars that Bhasa is the only one from ancient India to have written plays that actually fall under the tragedy genre. So now, what they mean by this is, so now even if you look at a lot of the other plays that we saw, which are, for example, Malatimadhava or Vasavadatta, Subandhu's Vasavadatta would be a good example. There are a lot of elements in that play which I mentioned. For example, they have to elope. They are not given consent to get married. Then Vasavadatta is cursed, so they are separated once again. So there's a lot of tragic elements in Vasavadatta. But ultimately, the novel is a romance novel, so which means that the goal is to bring the two protagonists together and to have a happy ending. Similarly, with Malatimadhava, Bhavabhutis, the genre contains a lot of horror and eerie elements, right? But ultimately, once again, the goal of that book is to bring the protagonists together. So a lot of these books which contain tragedy, like like in the form of separation, loss, death, all of these themes, ultimately when they fall under the romance genre, the goal is to bring the protagonists together and ultimately have a love story. But in ancient India, there was a conception or a perception that tragic stories or tragedy were inappropriate, and the only legitimate stories, appropriate stories, were either stories that were extremely heroic, based on epics which championed gods and goddesses, or which had happy endings in the form of either comedy or in the form of romance. So tragedies were frowned upon, and Bhasa is believed to have been the only playwright, at least of the materials that we have today, to have written tragedies. And the two tragedies that he has written are Urubhanga and Karnabhanga. Urubhanga focuses on the time when Duryodhana is near death, his thigh is about to be shattered. And so it's about how he thinks back upon his life and he repents for everything that he's done, and he also justifies why he has taken certain decisions. And Karnabhanga is again another tragic story of the last moments of Karna's life, and looking back into Karna's life, which basically shows how he came to that fateful moment just before his death. So one of the things that a lot of scholars appreciate about Bhasa is that although he did side with the protagonists, with the heroes who were generally conventionally considered to be on the right side, right? Although he sided with them, he had a deep empathy and appreciation for the antagonists as well, and he genuinely tried to understand psychologically as to why someone would take those decisions or why these people behaved the way they did. And therefore that is why you see in a lot of his plays there is a deep understanding of the psyche of not just the people who are considered right, but also the people who are considered to be in the wrong. So yeah, that is about Bhasa. Now I'll just talk about some of the plays that are there. I'm just going to read out the list of plays that are there over here. So the 13 plays of Bhasa has Pratijana Yogandharayana. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing them. Swapna Vasavadatta, Charudatta, Pancharatra, Madhyama Vyoyaga, Pratima Nataka, Dyuta Vakya, Duta Ghota Kacha, Karna Bharna, Urubhanga, Avimaraka, Bala Charita, Abhisheka. Again, I'm so sorry for annihilating those words. This book is really great. I had to wait a long time to get my hands on this book because it had to be imported. I think I'm not really sure where it came from. It took almost a month to get here, and it is so worth it. This one does not have the Sanskrit translation. It has only the English text. But I think if you're looking, there is another version of this, not with the 13 plays, but with I think just 5 of his plays based on the Mahabharata, called Shattered Thigh and Other Plays by A.N.D. Haskar. That's translated by A.N.D. Haskar. So that is something that you'll actually find in bookstores and on Amazon if you're looking to get some of his plays right away. This 13 plays, again, you can check on Amazon or some of your local bookstores which have these out of print books or rarely printed books available. But Amazon would be your best guess. I'm someone who always says, go to the local bookstores if you can. But these are some books which don't have many publications, so not a lot of people print them, not a lot of people stock them. So if you can get them on Amazon, just go right ahead and do it. this brings me to the end of this video. It's been a really long video, a long list of books, but I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talking about it, and I cannot wait to dive into all of them. So let me know in the comments down below, do you have any of these books? Do you have all of them? Do you have other books which I don't have in my list, in both part 1 and part 2, and which you think I should get right now? I would love to know. I love collecting books from ancient India, which ancient Indian literature, and I'm always looking for recommendations. So if you have any recommendations that I've not mentioned either here or in part 1, I will link that video down below in the description as well. So do let me know, and let me know if you're planning on getting any of these books and reading them. All right, if you stuck around with me so far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time on Tales in Text. Bye bye.